My brother-in-law handed me a 30-day eviction notice at my mother-in-law's funeral, but the same afternoon I found a small cedar box locked with a brass clasp hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her closet. Inside, on the last page of a battered notebook, she had scrawled 4 words that would ultimately send him to federal prison. "He will forge everything." I did not know on that gray November afternoon that those words would be the pivot on which a $900,000 lakefront estate turned. That I would spend 8 months living inside his home, cataloging his fraud. Or that a quiet electrician's widow who spent 7 years changing adult diapers and rewiring a 1940s cabin would dismantle a real estate developer so completely he was let out of a title office in handcuffs while his designer wife shrieked about a frozen Nordstrom card. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that every selfless act of care plants a seed that eventually grows into a force even the greediest cannot uproot. I was 43 years old when Tom died. He was an ironworker out of Local 86, and on a Tuesday in April 2015, a crane cable snapped on a job site in Tacoma. And just like that I was a widow with a 3-bedroom rambler, we could barely afford and no real handle on who I was supposed to be anymore. Tom had been the youngest of 2 sons, and his parents Frank and Evelyn lived 3 hours north in a place called Loon Lake, a narrow fingernail of water tucked into the foothills of the Cascades with old-growth cedars leaning over mossy docks and a single general store that closed for the winter. Their cabin had been built in 1947 by Evelyn's father, a Finnish carpenter who'd milled his own lumber from trees on the property. And by the time Tom and I married, I'd spent enough summer weekends on that sagging wraparound porch to know exactly where every floorboard squeaked and exactly how thick the blackberry brambles got if you didn't take a machete to them by July. Frank had early-onset Parkinson's, already advanced enough that he needed help with transfers from chair to bed, help with his medications timed down to the half hour, help with pureed meals when the dysphagia got bad. And Evelyn was a retired 4th-grade teacher with a titanium spine and a checkbook balanced to the penny. But her own heart was a time bomb with a faulty mitral valve she refused to repair until Frank was gone because she said a surgeon's knife on her chest would mean nobody could lift Frank from his wheelchair, and she trusted no one else to do it gently enough. 3 weeks after the funeral, when I was still sleeping in the guest room of our Rambler because I couldn't bring myself to even open the door to the master bedroom, Evelyn called me. She was not a woman who wasted time on pleasantries. "I'm not asking you to move up here, sweetheart. I'm telling you the guest room is ready, and your brother-in-law has already said he can't help. Michael has a development deal closing. Always has a deal closing." She said Michael's name the way you'd say a storm that's still offshore, but you can already feel the pressure dropping. Michael, 7 years older than Tom, had left Washington for Southern California the day he turned 18, got his real estate license at 20, and by 45 was a minor but intensely ambitious player in Orange County luxury, flips with a spray-tanned wife named Brittany, who referred to Loon Lake as, "Oh, that little swamp town." He came up for 1 week each year, always the week of Christmas, and spent the entire visit on his phone on the porch while I cooked the prime rib and Evelyn filed her nails into points. Frank would sit in his recliner staring at Michael with this hollowed-out expression, and once, when Michael had cut a visit short to fly back early for a bidding war, Frank had muttered to me, "I raised a stranger." My husband Tom, years before the accident, had said something similar. "My brother loves real estate more than people. He called Mom's cabin a depreciating teardown to her face once." At Christmas dinner, that memory floated back to me as I packed a single suitcase to spend what I thought would be a few weeks helping Evelyn manage. I packed up the Rambler piece by piece, put most of our furniture in storage, and moved into the Loon Lake cabin in June 2015. The house was technically a 3-season cottage with knob and tube wiring from the Truman administration, a fuse box that sparked and threw hot blue arcs when you ran the toaster and the coffee maker at the same time, and a stone foundation that wept groundwater into a crawl space, so humid the joists had a soft, punky give underfoot. I had my journeyman electrician license. I'd done industrial commercial work for 15 years before Tom died, and I also had the life insurance payout, about $112,000 after debts, plus a small annuity from the union that paid me $800 a month. Evelyn and Frank were living on Social Security and Frank's tiny machinist pension from a gear-cutting plant in Spokane that had closed in the 1990s, something like $1,400 a month total. So when the first winter storm blew through and the fuses kept popping in the bathroom, I bought a roll of 12-gauge Romex and a new breaker box and started fixing things. The first winter, I rewired the entire house myself. I pulled the old fabric-wrapped rag wire out of the lath and plaster walls inch by inch using a fish tape and a lot of patience, ran new circuits with ground wires, put in a 200-amp panel with arc fault breakers, grounded every receptacle, and added GFCI outlets in the kitchen and bath that would actually pass an inspection. I did this over 4 months, working in the crawl space on my back with a headlamp, wearing a respirator because the old insulation was full of mouse droppings, and 70 years of dust, while Evelyn sat up in the kitchen reading library books aloud so I could hear her through the floor. That project alone cost me around $11, $400 in materials because copper was sky-high that year, and I paid a local inspector cash under the table to keep the permit fees low, all from my own savings. The second year, I replumbed the entire house, replacing galvanized pipe with PEX, putting in a new 40-gallon water heater with a thermal expansion tank, and digging a French drain around the foundation because the crawl space flooded every spring and I'd wake up to the smell of wet rot. Another $9, $700 out of my pocket. The third year, I had the cedar siding replaced on the north exposure, where carpenter ants had turned the outer boards into something that looked like layered phyllo dough. $14, $200, because I had to hire a Finnish carpenter from Colville who specialized in historic restoration to replicate the intricate corner boards and window casings that Evelyn's father had hand-carved in 1948. The fourth year, I rebuilt the dock, pulling out the old rotted float drums and setting new pressure-treated joists on galvanized brackets, another $8, $300. The fifth year, it was a standing seam metal roof because the original cedar shakes were cupping and leaking into the attic, $16, $500 for materials, and a crew I hired to help with the tear-off. Year 6, I replaced the furnace with a high-efficiency heat pump system, $11, $200. Year 7, I refinished the hardwood floors that had been hidden under linoleum since the Nixon administration, $5, $800 for a drum sander rental, and 7 coats of water-based poly. Over 7 full years, I poured $93,000 into that cabin. Not a single penny came out of Evelyn's pocket because I wouldn't let her. Every time she tried to hand me a check, I'd wave it off and say, "Put it toward Frank's physical therapy," or "Buy yourself a winter coat that isn't from 1987. And Frank, when he could still speak clearly enough to form full sentences, would reach out a trembling hand and pat mine and say, "You're the daughter we never had, Sarah. The daughter we actually got." I never thought about what would happen when they were gone because I genuinely believed I would be part of whatever came next. Michael, the actual son, visited once per year for 5 days, usually Wednesday to Sunday around December 23rd. He'd pull up in a rented Escalade that looked absurdly shiny against the mossy gravel driveway, unload gift bags from Nordstrom filled with overpriced cashmere scarves and boxes of chocolates that neither Frank nor Evelyn could eat, spend exactly 1 hour being charming and theatrical in the living room, and then retreat to the porch to take business calls with his voice pitched low and conspiratorial. Brittany would wander the cabin wrinkling her nose at the wood smoke smell and the lack of a sub-zero refrigerator, and one visit she asked Evelyn, "Have you thought about something more modern, something near a Saks? There's a lovely continuing care place in La Jolla that overlooks the ocean." Evelyn's response was a single arched eyebrow and the phrase, "I'd sooner be eaten by bears." My sister-in-law knew the cabin was potentially worth significant money because Michael had told her so, had probably done the comps himself. Lakefront on Loon Lake with its private dock and a full acre of old-growth cedar, easily high 6 figures and climbing, maybe 7 if the Seattle tech exodus reached that far north. I suspect that's when the clockwork of the next 5 years began ticking in their heads, a slow, patient plan to wait out the deaths of 2 elderly people and claim a property they had never lifted a finger to maintain. Frank died in my arms in September 2019. I was alone with him because Evelyn had gone into town for a cardiology appointment, and he'd had a sudden aspiration episode that turned into pneumonia despite the feeding tube I'd learned to manage. His last words were whispered in a voice that was mostly breath. "Keep her safe." I promised I would. Evelyn lasted until November 2023, her own heart finally giving out at 81 after a series of small strokes that I managed at home, with hospice nurses coming in twice a week to check vitals and renew the medication regimen. The final 6 months of her life, she was on a rotating cocktail of morphine for pain, lorazepam for anxiety, and after a fall that fractured 2 ribs in late September, oxycodone 10 milligrams every 4 hours. That detail matters because the final will, the one that surfaced after her death and gave the entire estate to Michael, was dated October 17, 2023, smack in the middle of a medication window so heavy she could barely recognize her own reflection. I know because I was the one holding the pill cup to her lips and charting every dose, and I kept a meticulous medication log that would later become evidence in a federal case. She died on a Thursday morning, November 9, at 4:17 a.m. I was sitting in the armchair next to the hospital bed I'd set up in the living room so she could see the lake through the window, holding her hand. Her breathing had become a shallow, wet rattle that I'd learned meant hours, not days. Her last lucid words had been 3 days earlier on November 6, when she'd suddenly surfaced through the opiate fog, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and rasped, "The box under the floor. In my closet. The loose board. Tom's birthday is the clue. Promise me you'll look. Promise me, Sarah." Her eyes were desperate and clear. I promised, but grief fogged my memory the way it does when your entire nervous system is in triage mode, and I didn't think about the box again until after the funeral. I called hospice. I called the funeral home. I called a few of Evelyn's retired teaching colleagues with the news, and then I sat on the porch in the cold November mist and waited for the vultures to arrive. Michael and Brittany arrived late Friday night, 18 hours after her death, having flown first class into Spokane and rented a Lincoln Navigator as if they were arriving for a hostile corporate takeover. He was wearing a Brunello Cucinelli blazer that probably cost more than the new roof I'd put on the cabin, and carrying a leather laptop bag that looked like it had never touched the ground. His first words to me on entering the cabin, before any expression of condolence or even a perfunctory hug, were, "Sarah, we need to discuss the transition. Obviously, you'll want time to find your own place, but the property needs to be prepared for market conditions, and Brittany already has a staging consultant on retainer." Brittany was already opening kitchen cabinets with a critical lift of one eyebrow, pulling out my mismatched stoneware mugs and setting them aside as if cataloging items for a donation bin. I was still in the same flannel shirt I'd worn for 2 days, my hair unwashed and pulled back with a clip, my eyes red-rimmed and hollow, and I just nodded and said, "Of course, Michael. I appreciate you coming. Let me help with whatever you need." I could see a flash of something cross his face, maybe relief, maybe contempt, the look of a predator who just confirmed the prey was too exhausted to run. The funeral was on Monday, November 13, at the tiny Methodist church in town, where Evelyn had taught Sunday school for 30 years. The place was packed with former students and neighbors, and the pastor gave a eulogy that mentioned Evelyn's tireless daughter-in-law Sarah, who has been the hands and feet of Christ in that cabin. Michael sat in the front pew with a fixed expression of polite impatience, checking his phone twice during the service. The lawyer was a man named Gerald Fisk, a small-town estate practitioner with a comb-over so elaborate it looked like a weather system, and a nervous blink that I later learned was a reaction to his own long experience with greedy heirs. He'd been Evelyn's attorney for 30 years, drafting her first will back in the 1990s, updating it every few years like clockwork. But I had never met him because Evelyn handled all her own financial affairs, and I never felt the need to insert myself. After the graveside service, while the last of the attendees were drifting away under cold gray clouds that threatened snow, Michael invited me to a family meeting at the lone coffee shop in town, and that's where Gerald Fisk unsealed a manila envelope with trembling fingers and read the will aloud. The document was short, barely 3 pages, witnessed by Brittany's personal assistant, a woman named Tiffany whom I'd met exactly once at a Christmas dinner when she'd flown up to deliver documents for Michael to sign, and a notary I'd never heard of, a mobile notary out of Spokane named R. Jeffords, whose seal was smudged but legible. The will stated in clear, unambiguous language that the entire estate, including the cabin, its contents, all financial accounts, and any real property wheresoever situated, was devised to Michael Christopher Kessler, my brother-in-law, absolutely and in fee simple. I was not mentioned once, not even to acknowledge 7 years of uncompensated 24-hour care, not even to reimburse a single dollar of the $93,000 I documented in a thick 3-ring binder of receipts and invoices because Evelyn had always said, "Keep those, sweetheart, you'll need them when it's yours. I'm going to make sure it's yours." I had believed her with the same unquestioning faith with which I'd rewired the south wall. Michael slid a typed sheet across the table without a word. It was a 30-day notice to vacate, already signed, dated that very day, the day of his mother's funeral. He said, "I know this is hard, Sarah, but the property is now legally in my name, and we need to get it on the market to satisfy some pressing financial obligations. Brittany already has a stager lined up from Spokane who specializes in lakefront properties. You can take personal items, clothing, photographs, but nothing that is fixed to the walls or permanently installed." Brittany added, with a smile that could have been printed on a brochure, "We'll give you a good reference for your next rental. We know some property managers in the area. It's the least we can do." Her tone was so rehearsed it could have been a voicemail greeting from a dental practice. I said, "Okay." I folded the eviction notice in half and then in quarters and put it in my purse, which was a canvas tote bag with a broken strap. I told them I'd be out by mid-December, maybe sooner if I could find a storage unit for the few things I wanted to keep. Michael seemed almost disappointed at my lack of resistance, and looking back, that was exactly what I needed him to feel. The fog of compliance. The appearance of a broken woman who wouldn't make trouble, who could be shuffled off to a cheap apartment in Spokane Valley while they liquidated the only home I'd known for nearly a decade. That afternoon, I went back to the cabin and started the grim work of packing Evelyn's bedroom while they were out meeting with a real estate agent who'd appraised the property sight unseen at $820,000, a number I overheard Michael repeating on the porch like a mantra. Michael and Brittany had taken over the master suite upstairs, the one with the view of the dock and the cedar grove, the suite they had previously always refused to sleep in because it smelled like old people and menthol rub. They were upstairs rearranging furniture. I could hear the scrape of a dresser on the hardwood, while I worked in the room that had been Evelyn's refuge for 40 years, her sewing room and reading room, and the place she went to cry when Frank's Parkinson's tremor got so bad he couldn't feed himself anymore. I pulled everything out of the closet, shoes and sweater boxes tied with twine, stacks of quilting fabric she'd never finished, her collection of vintage cookie tins filled with buttons and thread. And that's when I noticed the faint outline of a cut board in the floor beneath the shoe rack. A rectangle about 8 inches by 12, with a small worn finger hole drilled at one edge. I remembered her words, the box under the floor, Tom's birthday. I pried up the floorboard with a butter knife from the kitchen, the metal bending slightly against the tight fit, and underneath, resting on the dusty joists in a pocket of still air that smelled of cedar and old paper, was a small wooden box with a brass clasp, no lock, just a tight friction fit that made a soft click when I opened it. Inside was a composition notebook, the blackened white marbled kind that cost $1 at any drugstore, its pages warped slightly from decades of humidity, and a single brass key with a paper tag attached that read in Evelyn's handwriting. Coastal Trust 214. Michael chose that exact moment to walk into the bedroom, having heard the creak of floorboards and come to investigate. He saw the box in my hands, the opened floorboard, and his expression flickered through something calculating before settling on dismissive. "What's that? Some old recipe collection? Mom's secret meatloaf binder? Just toss it. We're clearing everything out for the estate sale." He grabbed a black garbage bag from a roll on the dresser, scooped the box out of my hands with a casual motion, and dropped it into the bag along with a pile of moth-eaten wool scarves and a broken alarm clock. The brass key clinked against the clock's bell. "There's a dumpster being delivered tomorrow morning," he said, "so bag up anything you don't want and I'll have the crew haul it." And he walked out, the garbage bag dangling from his hand like a sack of trash. I waited until they left for dinner at the only restaurant in town that took reservations, a place called The Lodge that served $16 burgers. and had a wine list Brittany described as quaint but acceptable. The moment the navigator's taillights disappeared down the gravel road, I walked out to the garage where the garbage bags were piled against a stack of firewood, and I pulled the box out of the trash. There was a coffee stain on the lid now, and the handle of the alarm clock had left a scratch, but the clasp was intact. I sat on Evelyn's bed, surrounded by the detritus of her life, the half-empty bottles of hand lotion and the reading glasses with one arm bent, and I opened the notebook. The first pages were just grocery lists and phone numbers, a record of December 2019 cookie exchange, a reminder to order furnace filters. But as I turned toward the back, the handwriting became shakier, the entries dated and increasingly desperate. October 10, 2023. Michael came again with papers, said I had to sign or he'd lose his house, said the bank would take everything. I told him no. Sarah was out getting my prescription. He waited until I was alone. October 12. Called Gerald. He said not to sign anything. I told him Michael had a document with a notary. He said he'd look into it. October 14. The pain is worse. Nurse doubled the meds today. I can barely hold a pen. I'm scared of what I might do when I'm asleep. October 17. I woke up and my hand was sore like I'd been gripping a pen for hours. He said I signed something but I don't remember, something about the house. I'm scared, Sarah. October 30. In handwriting so shaky it looked like a seismograph. Sarah, if you find this, look at the key. Trust no one. He will forge everything. The trust is your shield. Go to Coastal. Those last words sent a cold trickle of electricity down my spine, the kind of electric shock I'd felt exactly twice in my career, both times when I'd grabbed a wire I thought was dead. The trust. I had no idea what trust she meant, no recollection of Evelyn ever mentioning any kind of legal arrangement beyond a simple will. But I had a key with a bank name and a box number, and I had a dead woman's warning written in her own hand. That night I lay in the guest bedroom, still stripped of its sheets because Brittany had already bagged them for donation, and I stared at the ceiling where a water stain in the shape of Lake Superior had been spreading since 1982. I made a decision. I was not going to leave quietly. I was not going to roll over. I was going to play exactly the role Michael expected, the dazed, compliant widow with no fight left, the woman who'd worked with her hands so long she'd forgotten how to use her voice, while I dug into every crack of his life until I had enough evidence to plant him in the ground legally, the way he'd tried to do to me fiscally. And if I failed, I'd at least go down knowing I'd tried to honor the woman who'd written that warning with a shaking hand. The next morning, over coffee that Brittany made in a French press she'd brought from California because she didn't trust the percolator, Michael and his wife announced that I would come stay with them in Orange County. "You need to be surrounded by family, Sarah," Brittany cooed, her fingers scrolling through Zillow on her phone while she talked, already mentally redecorating the cabin as an Airbnb. "You've got a lovely guest suite, a detached casita with its own entrance and a kitchenette. You can recover, grieve, figure out your next chapter without the stress of moving into some depressing apartment." Translation: they wanted me out of the cabin immediately so they could begin the sale process without me poking around, and they wanted me close enough that they could control what I said and to whom. I agreed with a show of tearful gratitude. I packed 2 suitcases of clothes, my tool bag, which I never traveled without because it was as much a part of me as my left arm, and the composition notebook with the brass key, tucked into a zippered pocket inside my jacket lining. I flew to Orange County on November 17th, 2023, in seat 18A on a Southwest flight, with a plastic cup of ginger ale and a plan forming cell by cell like a wiring diagram I was drawing in my head. Michael's house was a 10,000-square-foot Tuscan villa in Coto de Caza, a gated community built around a golf course and a country club where the initiation fee was rumored to be north of $100,000. The house had a 5-car garage, a negative edge pool that appeared to spill into the canyon below, a home theater with leather recliners, and the kind of marble flooring that made every footstep echo like a judgment. The guest suite was a detached casita past the pool house, across a small courtyard with a fountain that ran 24 hours a day, and it had its own entrance, its own kitchenette with a mini-fridge and a 2-burner induction cooktop, and gilded towel racks in a bathroom that was larger than my entire bedroom at the cabin. It was a gilded cage, designed to keep me comfortable, isolated, and oblivious, and for the first 3 weeks, I let them think it was working. I wandered the grounds in yoga pants I'd bought at Target, I ate meals with them in the main house and nodded along to their stories about country club membership dues and the neighbor's lawsuit over a hedge. I answered Michael's occasional pointed questions about the cabin with vague, pleasant non-answers. "Oh, I'm sure the stager will do a wonderful job. I don't know anything about real estate," I'd say. "The dock was rebuilt a few years ago, but I don't remember the details." But under that foggy surface, I was cataloging. The first red flag came on a Tuesday, the 21st of November, when Michael took a call in his study, and I happened to be passing the hallway with a cup of tea, the thick ceramic mug muffling the sound of my approach. The door was ajar, a sliver of light falling across the marble, and I heard his voice rise in that particular pitch of a man who was lying to someone and losing the argument. "I don't care what the comps are. I don't care that it's November and the lakefront market is soft. I need a cash offer by the end of the month. I told you, the Calabasas project is defaulting, and if I don't infuse capital from the lake property, I'm looking at a mechanic's lien on the Santa Ana build by December 15. The cabin is in my name now. The probate is open. It's free and clear. The old lady's daughter-in-law is not contesting. Just find a buyer who can close fast, even if it's at 90 cents on the dollar." He was pacing, his Ferragamo loafers making sharp little clicks on the walnut floor, a sound I came to associate with his rising panic. "No, she's staying with me. She's practically a zombie. She's been a live-in nurse for 7 years. She doesn't have the money to fight a parking ticket. Just get it done." The word zombie hit me like a slap, but I kept walking, my teacup perfectly steady. The second flag came 2 days later when Brittany hosted a brunch for her tennis friends, a group of women with identical blonde highlights and diamond tennis bracelets that clinked against their mimosa glasses. I was seated next to a woman named Janice who asked how I knew the Kesslers, and before I could answer, Brittany cut in from across the table with a smile so sharp it could have cut the quiche. "Sarah's a family friend. We're just helping her out while she transitions. She's been up in Washington taking care of some elderly relatives, such a saint, but now she's ready for a fresh start down here. Aren't you, Sarah?" I smiled and nodded and said something about the weather. I was no longer a sister-in-law, no longer a caregiver, no longer the woman who'd held her mother-in-law's hand as she died. I was a family friend being helped out, and that word choice told me exactly how Michael and his wife were planning to position me if I ever became inconvenient. The third flag arrived in the form of a FedEx envelope that I accidentally on purpose intercepted on the front porch while Michael was out at a meeting. I'd been walking back from the mailbox at the end of the long driveway when the FedEx truck pulled up, and the driver handed me the envelope, which was addressed to Michael with a return address of Gerald Fisk's law office in Washington. I took it to the casita, boiled water in my little electric kettle, and used the steam and a paring knife to carefully lift the adhesive flap without tearing the paper. Inside was a copy of the probate petition Michael had filed in Ferry County Superior Court, listing the cabin's estimated value at $820,000 and attesting under penalty of perjury that Evelyn Kessler had died with no debts, no liens, no encumbrances, and no surviving spouse. What it didn't list, what it conspicuously omitted, was the home equity line of credit I discovered 3 years earlier when I'd helped Evelyn sort through a stack of old files. It was $210,000 HELOC from a regional bank in Spokane that Evelyn had taken out in 2014 to pay for Frank's initial round of Parkinson's treatments and a few modifications to the house for wheelchair accessibility. She had told me she'd paid it off in full in 2018 after selling Frank's old Ford F-250 and a stand of timber on the back acreage, and I'd helped her file the satisfaction paperwork with the county recorder myself, so I knew the lien had been released. But I also knew that the loan had existed, and that its existence, even if paid off, created a paper trail that contradicted Michael's sworn statement of a debt-free estate. I memorized the case number, used my phone to photograph every page, and then resealed the envelope with a glue stick I'd bought at a drugstore, replacing it on the front hall table as if it had never been opened. By mid-December, the cracks in Michael's financial facade were visible to anyone paying attention, and I was paying very close attention. Phone calls at odd hours, his voice muffled behind closed doors, the landline ringing with numbers from area codes I didn't recognize, and then the same numbers showing up on his cell phone with increasing frequency. I learned Through careful eavesdropping and a few well-timed questions at the country club's holiday party, where Michael had drank too much and bragged too loudly, that he'd defaulted on a construction loan for a flip in Long Beach, a $10 million spec house that was still only 60% complete and hemorrhaging cash. His lender had filed a notice of default, an event that triggered cross-default clauses in several other loans because Michael, like many over-leveraged developers, had cross-collateralized everything. The cabin was his only unencumbered asset, or so he believed, and he needed it to sell and close before January 15th, or he'd lose not just the Long Beach project, but his personal residence and several investment properties. Worse, I learned that he had taken out a hard money bridge loan at 14% interest from a private lender in Irvine to cover the gap, a loan with provisions so predatory that missing a single payment would allow the lender to seize his personal assets, including the house I was currently living in. I needed evidence, hard documented proof that the October will had been procured by fraud, and that Michael had been systematically draining whatever assets he could access both before and after Evelyn's death. The composition notebook was a start, a powerful piece of emotional evidence, but it was a dead woman's private journal written while heavily medicated, and any half-decent probate attorney could get it thrown out as hearsay, as the ramblings of a confused old woman. I needed the trust document, the financial records showing the fraudulent transfers, and something that tied Michael's actual signature or his direction to the forgery of the will and the loan documents. I needed the kind of evidence that a federal prosecutor could use without breaking a sweat. The issue was that I had physical access to the house, but no legitimate reason to go digging through Michael's home office. The study was always locked when he wasn't inside, and it had a Schlage keypad deadbolt with a 4-digit code that I saw him punch in twice, always shielding the keypad with his body, his fingers moving in a quick sequence that I couldn't quite catch. I had a general sense of the household's rhythm. Michael left for his development office around 9:30 in the morning, usually carrying a leather messenger bag and a travel mug of espresso. Brittany went to Pilates from 10 to 11:15 at a studio in Laguna Niguel, a drive that took exactly 17 minutes each way. The housekeeper, a woman named Rosa who spoke limited English and seemed terrified of Brittany, came on Tuesdays and Thursdays and spent most of her time in the main house. The pool guy came on Fridays. But even when the house was empty, I couldn't risk tripping an alarm or leaving any trace of my entry, because if Michael suspected I was investigating, he'd evict me from the casita, and I'd lose my entire observational perch, not to mention my access to his unguarded conversations. Then, on December 11th, the universe handed me a gift disguised as a disaster. A massive Santa Ana windstorm blew through Orange County with gusts topping 60 miles an hour, and at 4 in the morning, a eucalyptus branch the size of a telephone pole took out the transformer on Michael's Street, plunging the entire neighborhood into absolute darkness. The backup generator was supposed to kick in automatically. It was a whole-house Generac unit that Michael had installed after a previous blackout had cost him a freezer full of Wagyu beef. But the transfer switch malfunctioned, a common failure in that model when the control board gets hit with a surge. And when Michael got up to check, he found the generator's control panel was throwing a fault code that indicated a logic board failure. He stood in the kitchen, silhouetted by the glow of his phone's flashlight, swearing at an electrician who couldn't get a truck out until 9 because half the county was blacked out. That's when I padded in from the casita, wearing an old hoodie and my work boots because I'd heard the generator sputter and die, and I said, "Michael, I can take a look at it. It's what I did for 15 years. I might be able to force start the generator manually, bypass the logic board, get the house powered back up before the sump pumps fail and your basement floods." He looked at me with the first genuine interest I'd seen since the funeral, maybe the first genuine interest he'd ever directed at me. "You know how to do that?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice calm and practical. "I'll need to open the transfer switch panel and bypass the control logic. It's a Generac Guardian series, right? I've worked on a dozen of those. The fault is probably a voltage sag on the sensing circuit, which means the control board thinks the grid is still live, and it's refusing to engage the generator. I'll have to kill the main breaker first to completely isolate the house circuits. Then I can jumper the starter solenoid and force the generator to run in manual mode. After that, I'll reset the transfer mechanism mechanically, Give me 20 minutes and a flashlight. He handed me a high-lumen tactical flashlight that felt like it cost more than my first car, and I walked out to the generator pad in the howling wind, my hoodie plastering itself to my back. Rain was coming in sideways, cold needles against my face. It took me 12 minutes to get the generator humming. I opened the control panel, identified the sensing circuit that was showing the false grid voltage, disconnected it, placed a jumper wire across the starter solenoid terminals using alligator clips from my tool bag, and the big 60-kilowatt generator roared to life with a satisfying diesel growl. Then I went to the automatic transfer switch, a gray metal box on the side of the house, opened it despite the rain, and manually threw the mechanical interlock that would allow generator power to flow to the house circuits. The lights in the main house flickered once and then came on steady. Heat pumps started spinning up. In the distance, I could hear the faint whir of the pool filter restarting. When I came back inside, rain plastered to my hair, my hands black with generator grease. Michael was standing in the kitchen looking at me with something approaching respect. "Impressive," he said. "I didn't know you had that in you. Brittany always said you were just a nurse." I shrugged. "Old skills die hard. I spent a lot of years in crawl spaces and on rooftops. A generator is just a big engine with some electronics attached. I'll write down the fault code for your electrician so he can order the replacement board. But for now, you've got power." 2 days later, Michael's attitude toward me had shifted slightly, from dismissive to something almost approaching trust. He saw me now as a useful pair of hands, a fixer who could solve household problems without calling an expensive contractor. When the house's intercom system started acting up, a faint static crackle in the study's ceiling speaker that he complained about at breakfast because it was interfering with his conference calls, I offered to fix it. "It's probably a loose neutral in the low-voltage wiring," I said, "or a bad connection at the master hub. The intercom probably runs on a Cat5 backbone that terminates in a structured media panel somewhere, usually in a closet near the home office. I'd need to open the wall plate where the speaker crackles and trace the line back to the hub. I'd only need maybe 20 minutes in the study, and I'd need the room quiet so I can hear the tone generator." He hesitated, chewing a piece of sourdough toast, then nodded. "Fine, just don't touch the filing cabinet." He said it with a smirk that told me he thought I was too meek and too technically simple to even consider it. He genuinely saw me as a handywoman, not a threat. That afternoon, while Michael was at a closing appointment in Irvine and Brittany was indulging in an 80-minute hot stone massage at the spa, I gathered my tools from the casita. A Voltome meter, a set of insulated screwdrivers, a network cable tester with a tone generator probe, and tucked into the bottom of my tool pouch, a small plastic sleeve that held 2 lockpicks and a torsion wrench. I'd learned to pick simple wafer locks in my 20s, working apartment turnover jobs for slumlords in Tacoma who'd lost the keys to utility closets and electrical rooms and didn't want to pay a locksmith. A standard office filing cabinet with a cheap tubular lock is functionally identical to those utility closet locks. A simple disc-hand bar mechanism with no security pins, no mushroom pins, no spool pins, just flat discs that you rake open by applying light torque and scrubbing the pins until they set. The night before, after I'd heard Michael's plans for the day, I'd watched a 30-minute video tutorial on a Locksport channel, refreshing my memory on the exact angle and tension for wafer locks. I walked into the study with my tools, made a show of removing the intercom wall plate near the door and clipping my meter leads to the speaker terminals, and then I closed the heavy oak door and turned to the filing cabinet. The lock took me 90 seconds. I inserted the torsion wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied a light clockwise tension with my left thumb, and then raked the pick across the discs with a gentle seesawing motion, feeling for the subtle click of each disc setting into place. On the second pass, all 4 discs aligned, and the plug rotated with a smooth, oiled action. The top drawer slid out on its ball-bearing runners with a soft metallic sigh, revealing a sea of manila folders with handwritten labels, all organized with the meticulousness of a man who knew exactly what he was hiding and where. Inside those drawers was the architecture of my brother-in-law's collapse. I photographed everything with my phone, page by page, holding my breath every time the house creaked. The first file I pulled was labeled E, Kessler Estate. Inside was the original October 17 will, the one with the wet ink signatures, and clipped to it was a notarized physician's statement from a doctor I'd never heard of, a man named Dr. Alan Whitfield with an address in Spokane Valley. The statement, dated the same day as the will, declared Evelyn Kessler to be of sound mind, free from cognitive impairment, and fully capable of making informed decisions about her estate. I would later learn, through the FBI's investigation, that Dr. Whitfield had been paid $2,000 via a PayPal transfer from Tiffany, Brittany's personal assistant, and that he had never actually met Evelyn, never physically examined her, never even been in the same room. The notary who had stamped the document, a mobile notary named R. Jeffords, had also never met Evelyn. The signature was a forgery that had been executed by Michael himself, a fact later confirmed by a forensic document examiner who matched the handwriting to Michael's known samples. Next to the will was a series of bank statements from an account at First Republic Bank in Evelyn's name, an account I had never seen and never known existed. The statements showed a balance of $287,000 in September of 2023, money that Evelyn had apparently saved over decades from her teaching pension and Frank's machinist pension, stashed away in a separate account that Michael had somehow gained access to. And then, on October 20th, 2023, 3 days after the will signing, there was a single withdrawal in the amount of $286,000 transferred by wire to an account in the name of Kessler Development Partners, LLC at a bank in Newport Beach. The signature on the withdrawal slip was a trembling, halting approximation of Evelyn's handwriting that anyone who'd ever seen her actual checks would know was fake. I knew because I had balanced her checkbook every month for 6 years, and I knew the precise loops of her cursive, the way she crossed her T's with a flourish, the way she always wrote out the full dollar amount instead of using numerals. This signature looked like it had been produced by someone tracing over a sample, the letters shaky and uncertain in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with forgery. The second file was labeled Loon Lake Refinance. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened it. Inside were documents for a cash-out refinance of the cabin that Michael had initiated in August 2023, 2 months before Evelyn's death, while she was alive and heavily medicated and entirely unaware. The file contained a copy of Evelyn's driver's license, a photo that looked like it had been taken from her purse during one of Michael's visits, and using a remote notary service that Tiffany had set up through an online platform. Michael had signed Evelyn's name on a deed of trust, securing a new loan of $175,000 from a national mortgage lender. The loan had funded on September 5, 2023, and the proceeds had been wired directly to Kessler Development Partners. The cabin, which I had believed was free and clear since I'd helped Evelyn file the HELOC satisfaction in 2018, now carried a fresh, hidden lien that Michael had buried in the county records under a deed of trust with a forged signature. But the truly devastating detail was further down in the stack. The adjustable rate note listed me, Sarah Kessler, as a titled owner of record and a co-borrower. My own signature, a forgery I could spot instantly because the forger had misspelled my middle initial as J instead of M, and had drawn the loops of my S backwards, appeared on a promissory note that made me personally liable for $175,000 debt at a variable interest rate starting at 7.25%. He had not only stolen the cabin's equity, he had set me up as the legal fallback. If the loan went into default, which it surely would once the truth came out, the lender could come after me personally because I was fraudulently signed as a co-obligor. He was constructing a scenario where I would either vanish quietly, grateful for his care, or be buried under a mountain of debt that he himself had created. The third file was a thick accordion folder, simply marked Sarah, in Michael's blocky handwriting. Inside was a set of documents that turned my stomach. There was a purported promissory note from me to Michael, dated 2019, in the amount of $50,000 with 12% interest, allegedly representing a personal loan he'd made to me to cover caregiver expenses. The note had my name misspelled as Sarah in the signature line, a detail so lazy it was almost insulting. There was a typed letter on what appeared to be my letterhead, a letter I had never seen and certainly never composed, in which I agreed to reimburse Michael for all out-of-pocket expenses related to Frank and Evelyn's care, with a forgery of my signature that was even cruder than the one on the loan. And there was a contract from a caregiver service in Spokane, a company called Care One Solutions that I later learned was a shell entity with a registered agent in Delaware, showing that I had been paid $18,000 per year to provide in-home care to Frank and Evelyn Kessler from 2018 through 2023. The contract had a forged signature from an alleged company representative and a forged acceptance signature from me. The implications were crystalline. If I ever contested the will or claimed any moral right to the cabin, Michael would produce this stack of fabricated documents to demonstrate that I was not a loving daughter-in-law who had sacrificed everything, but a paid employee who had already been compensated for her time, a grifter who was trying to steal a family legacy that was never hers. It was a complete reputational destruction kit, designed to turn my 7 years of sacrifice into a commercial transaction and discredit me before any court. I photographed every page, every signature, every bank routing number, every notary stamp. My phone storage was filling up with the evidence of an elder abuse case so thorough and so malicious that I could feel a cold rage crystallizing in my chest, a rage that felt remarkably like focus. I replaced the folders exactly as I'd found them, aligning them with the same slight lean to the left that Michael had arranged. I relocked the filing cabinet, the tubular lock clicking back into place with a sound that felt like sealing a tomb. I wiped all the touch points with a microfiber cloth from my bag, cleaned the intercom wall plate and the speaker terminals, and then I actually fixed the intercom, which took all of 4 minutes. A loose spade connector on the back of the speaker that I recrimped with a pair of needle-nose pliers. I tested the system, heard the clear chime of the doorbell through the speaker, and left the study as if nothing at all had happened except the successful repair of a household appliance. That night, sitting alone in the casita with the composition notebook and the brass key on the table in front of me, I began to connect Evelyn's breadcrumb trail in earnest. Coastal Trust was a small community bank in Bellingham, Washington, 2 hours northwest of Loon Lake, a town I'd passed through once or twice on supply runs to the lumber yard. I had the bank's name now, and the box number, and I had a key. The next morning, using a burner phone I'd bought at a 7-Eleven near the freeway, I called the bank's customer service line. I'd looked up the trust department on their website while I was at a public library computer, because I didn't want any search history on my own phone that Michael might somehow access. The woman who answered was cautious but polite. I introduced myself as Sarah Kessler, the executor for Evelyn Kessler's estate, seeking information about a safe deposit box. She put me on hold for 3 minutes, and when she came back, her voice had shifted to something more formal. "We'll need to verify your identity in person, but I can tell you that Box 214 is registered to the Loon Lake Cabin Irrevocable Trust, dated March 14, 2022. The required key must be presented in person, along with valid identification, by the named trust protector. Are you the protector?" I felt my heart double thump. I said I would need to come in to discuss it, and I booked a flight north in my head before I even hung up. I had a name now, an irrevocable trust, a trust protector. Evelyn, in her final year of relative clarity, had not only predicted Michael's greed with a chilling accuracy, she had constructed a legal fortress around the cabin that predated the fraudulent will by a full 20 months. A fortress that could only be opened by someone she trusted, and that someone was not Michael. The next Saturday, December 16th, I told Michael and Brittany that I needed to return to Washington for a few days to pick up winter clothes and close my storage unit, a storage unit that actually existed and held my late husband's tools and a few pieces of furniture I hadn't been able to let go of. Michael was so deep in his own pressure cooker, so frantic about the January 15th deadline for the cabin sale, that he barely looked up from his laptop. "Fine, just be back by New Year's. I need you to sign some papers regarding the estate, just formalities to clear the title. Everything's moving forward nicely." He said it with the breezy confidence of a man who believed he had already won. I smiled my foggy widow smile and said, "Of course, Michael. I'll be back before Christmas." I drove a rented Camry up the I-5 corridor on December 19th, a cold, clear day with Mount Shasta hanging in the distance like a white cathedral. The drive took me 18 hours with a stop at a Motel 6 in Redding, and I used the time to mentally organize everything I'd discovered, to build the case in my head the way I used to build wiring diagrams. Every connection, every load, every potential short circuit. Coastal Trust was a 2-story brick building in downtown Bellingham, with brass fixtures and stained glass windows, and the smell of old ledger books and floor wax. The trust officer was a woman named Marjorie Kao, gray-haired and deliberate in her movements, who took my key and my driver's license and led me to a small private room with a steel table and a single chair. She brought out a long metal box, the kind that slides into a wall of identical boxes, and placed it before me with a soft thud. Inside, neatly arranged in archival folders, were 3 items: a manila envelope containing a fully executed irrevocable trust agreement, a separate durable power of attorney for financial and healthcare matters naming me as agent, and a handwritten letter from Evelyn dated February 14, 2022, exactly 20 months before she died. I read the letter first because I was afraid if I opened the legal documents first, I would lose my composure entirely and miss whatever Evelyn had needed me to know. The letter was written in her steady, pre-medication cursive, the handwriting of a woman who still knew exactly who she was and what she was fighting for. It said, "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, I am gone and you have figured out the box under the floor, which means you are as clever as I always believed. I did not tell you about this trust during my life because I knew Michael would pressure you. He would use every tool of manipulation and guilt, and I wanted you to have the strength of surprise. Men like Michael only win when they control the narrative, and you cannot control a narrative you do not know exists. The cabin is not in my probate estate. It has been conveyed into this trust as of March 2022, and I am the initial trustee. But upon my death, the trusteeship passes to a corporate fiduciary, Integrity Trust Company of Spokane. The trust provides that the cabin can never be sold, mortgaged, encumbered, or transferred without the written, notarized consent of the trust protector. That protector is you, Sarah Kessler, individually, not as my daughter-in-law, not as a beneficiary, but as a separate and independent legal actor with the power to veto any transaction for the remainder of your natural life. The trust also contains a reimbursement clause, Article 7. 3, which directs the trustee to reimburse you for any and all documented expenses you incurred maintaining or improving the property from June 2015 forward. I insisted on that clause, Sarah, because I saw how you poured your savings into those floors and those walls, and I will not have my son's greed erase your sacrifice. The binder of receipts you kept, the one I always told you to save, is legally enforceable under this trust. Michael knows nothing about this. I let him believe the cabin was mine to give because a man who thinks he has already won stops guarding the prize. The will he believes is valid, the will he thinks controls the estate, is worthless as to the cabin because the cabin is not mine to bequeath. It is the trust's, and the trust is yours to protect. Be careful, be patient, and when you are ready, protect what you built. With all my love and more gratitude than I ever found the words to say, Evelyn." The trust document was 72 pages, drafted by an estate planning firm in Seattle called Carr Tuttle Campbell, a firm with a reputation for bulletproof trusts. It was a masterpiece of defensive legal architecture. It named Integrity Trust Company as the successor trustee, a corporate entity that had no personal relationship with Michael and was bound by fiduciary duties so strict they could be sued for breaching them. It named me, Sarah Kessler, as trust protector, a role with a lifetime tenure, removable only by my own resignation or death. It gave me the sole power to approve or deny any sale, lease, encumbrance, or significant alteration of the trust property. And Article 7. 3, exactly as Evelyn had described, contained a detailed schedule called Exhibit A, which listed all 78 of my improvement invoices by date, vendor, and amount, totaling $93, $137, $42, and granted me an enforceable right of reimbursement from the trust's assets. The trust further provided that if I died without having exercised my protector powers, the cabin would not pass to any heir of Evelyn's, but would instead transfer to the Nature Conservancy of Washington with a perpetual conservation easement, meaning the land could never be developed. Michael's name did not appear anywhere in the 72 pages. He had been completely, surgically written out of the future of that property by a woman who had planned like a 4-star general. The power of attorney document was a secondary weapon, giving me legal authority over all of Evelyn's remaining non-trust assets, whatever she had in her checking accounts and personal effects, which wasn't much because she'd structured almost everything through the trust. But it also meant that any attempt by Michael to access her bank accounts or claim her personal property would run directly into my legal authority as her agent, an authority that survived her death under Washington's durable power of attorney statute. Marjorie Ko saw the tears running down my face and quietly pushed a box of tissues across the steel table. Mrs. Kessler was one of the most forward-thinking clients I've ever had the privilege of working with, she said. She came to us in late January 2022 with her own estate plan already drafted and a very clear vision. She laid out this exact scenario. She said her one son was a good man who died too young, and her other son was a predator who had been circling the property for years and would wait until she was too weak to fight. She wanted to make sure the predator starved. She said, and I quote, "My daughter-in-law rewired my house in the dark. She's not afraid of anything with a solution. Give her the key." I asked Marjorie if she could refer me to an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse and trust litigation, someone who could take what I had and build a case that would stand up in both civil and criminal court. She opened a drawer and handed me a business card for a woman named Robin Adelson, a former federal prosecutor who now ran a boutique firm in Everett specializing in financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. I called Robin from the parking lot of Coastal Trust, my rental car still cold and my breath fogging in the December air. And by that same evening, I was sitting in her conference room on the 8th floor of a glass office building, uploading the hundreds of photographs from my phone to her secure document server. Robin was 50-ish, sharp-jawed, with salt and pepper hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, and a photograph of her own elderly parents on her desk. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, her hands folded on a yellow legal pad, and when I finished, she said, "This is unusually clean, Sarah. The forged note making you a co-borrower is wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, both federal offenses. The fraudulent physician's statement and the forged notarization constitute forgery in the first degree and perjury. The Hellock extraction from Evelyn's First Republic account is elder theft, a Class B felony in Washington state carrying up to 10 years. And the probate petition that Michael filed, attesting under penalty of perjury that the estate was debt-free when he knew the refinance lien existed, is perjury before a court. I can refer this entire package to the FBI's Elder Fraud Task Force. I have a direct contact, an agent named David Hennessy in the Seattle field office, who's been working a series of serial filial exploitation cases up and down the I-5 corridor. He'll see the pattern immediately. Simultaneously, I can file a civil suit in Ferry County for undue influence, for declaratory relief on the validity of the trust, and for reimbursement of your documented expenses under the trust's own terms. She paused, tapping her pen on the notepad. But Sarah, I need you to do something difficult, possibly the most difficult part of all of this. I need you to go back to Orange County and continue playing the role. The foggy widow, the compliant handywoman, the woman who doesn't know anything. We need to catch Michael in the act of trying to enforce the fraudulent will, attempting to sell trust property without protector consent, and ideally, attempting to force you to sign something that would constitute a fresh federal crime. If we tip him off too soon, he'll start shredding documents, hiding assets offshore, and we'll lose the clear chains of evidence we need for a criminal conviction. The arrest, when it comes, needs to happen in a moment of clear-cut, undeniable criminal attempt, with agents present. Can you do that? I said yes. I flew back to California on December 23rd, the day before Christmas Eve, with a digital recording device disguised as a car key fob that Robin had supplied, a device that would record audio for 18 hours on a single charge and upload to a secure cloud server anytime it was near a known Wi-Fi network. I had a new burner phone with encrypted messaging, and I had the direct number for Agent Hennessy's task force memorized. I was wired for sound, emotionally hollowed out and filled back up with a cold, patient resolve, and I was ready to watch my brother-in-law combust in slow motion. Christmas passed in a blur of forced cheer. Michael and Brittany hosted a Christmas Eve party for their country club set, and I was trotted out as the distant cousin from up north who was staying with them for a while, a story they'd clearly workshopped. I smiled and nodded and helped the caterer carry trays of mini crab cakes, and all the while the key fob in my pocket was recording everything. Michael's boasts about the Washington lakefront asset that was about to close, his offhand comment to a business partner that the old lady's nurse is harmless. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She doesn't even read English that well. A statement so profoundly inaccurate and so casually cruel that it made my teeth ache. The maximum cruelty beat, the moment that extinguished any residual flicker of familial feeling I might have harbored, came on New Year's Day. I had been waiting for the right moment to test them, to see if there was any humanity left behind those designer sunglasses and those mortgage-financed smiles. And I chose New Year's morning because I knew they'd both be home all day, nursing hangovers and watching the Rose parade in their matching monogrammed bathrobes. I had researched a safe, fast-acting way to simulate a cardiac event without causing myself actual harm. I found an over-the-counter supplement at a health food store, a concentrated beetroot extract pill that, if taken on an empty stomach and followed immediately by standing up quickly, could cause a temporary but dramatic drop in blood pressure, enough to make a person pale, dizzy, and visibly faint for 60 to 90 seconds. I tested it twice in the privacy of the casita to make sure I wouldn't actually lose consciousness or injure myself on the way down. And on January 1st, after a breakfast of black coffee and nothing else, I took the supplement, waited for the familiar head rush, and then walked into the hallway outside the kitchen where I knew Michael would pass on his way to the study. I clutched my chest, let my knees buckle genuinely, and collapsed onto the marble floor with a thud that I felt in my hip for a week. My face went pale, my breathing became shallow and ragged, and I let my eyelids flutter half-closed. From under my lashes, I could see everything. Michael walked around the corner, a mug of espresso in his hand, and stopped dead. He stared at my crumpled body on his imported marble, and there was no rush forward, no shout for help, no fumble for his phone to call 911. Just a long, flat, evaluating stare, as if he were assessing whether a broken water pipe was going to damage the flooring. His gaze broke from my face and shifted to the manila envelope that had slipped from my hand when I fell and skidded a few feet across the polished stone. It was a decoy envelope I'd prepared, labeled in bold marker Coastal Trust Protector documents, and filled with blank printer paper. He stepped over my outstretched arm, his loafer brushing the sleeve of my blouse with a whisper of contact, and bent to pick up the envelope. He examined it, his face first puzzled, then darkening with a slow, spreading rage that erased any pretense of concern. He turned back to me, still lying on the floor with my chest heaving, and said, "What have you been doing, Sarah? What is this trust? What does protector mean? Not are you okay? Not can you hear me?" He stood over my body holding that envelope with white-knuckled fingers while his wife Brittany walked in behind him, a mimosa in her hand, and said with a complete and absolute lack of effect, "Is she dead?" In the same tone you'd use asking if the UPS truck had left a package by the gate. That was the point of no return. I moaned, stirred, and pretended to come around slowly. "I think I passed out," I whispered. "Michael, please call an ambulance. I think something's wrong with my heart." He didn't. He handed the envelope to Brittany and said, "You're fine. You just stood up too fast. Get up. We need to have a serious conversation about this trust and whatever little scheme you've been cooking behind our backs." His voice was ice. I got up slowly, using the wall for support, and said, "I need to lie down. I'll be in the casita." I limped away, and through the open door I heard him already on the phone, not to a doctor, not to any sort of medical professional, but to Gerald Fisk, his voice tight with fury. "There's a trust, some kind of irrevocable trust. It just showed up in the preliminary title report for the cabin, a cloud on the title. I need you to find out everything about it, who the trustee is, who the protector is, and whether we can sue to break it. Because if that trust is valid, the whole sale collapses and I'm done." Over the next 10 days, the confrontation unfolded in a series of orchestrated moves that I was coordinating with Robin Adelson and Agent Hennessy in real time. Robin had already filed a notice of trust existence with the probate court in Ferry County, attaching a copy of the 72-page trust agreement and demanding that the October 17 will be declared moot as to the cabin, that Michael be immediately removed as executor for fraud upon the court, and that a constructive trust be imposed on any proceeds of the fraudulent cash-out refinance. She had also referred the entire package of forged documents, the stolen First Republic funds, the fake co-borrower note, and the fabricated caretaker contracts to Agent David Hennessy of the FBI's Seattle field office, who opened a case file under the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, and began coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Washington. Hennessy was a methodical man in his 50s with a trimmed gray beard and the calm, patient voice of someone who'd worked white-collar crime for 2 decades and had seen every permutation of familial greed. He told Robin that Michael's pattern fit a profile they'd been tracking: serial filial abusers who target elderly parents with dementia by cycling through multiple wills, remote notary fraud, and caregiver scapegoating. My case was going to be added to a broader investigation that already had active warrants in 3 states. Meanwhile, Michael was spiraling spectacularly. His hard money lender, the private equity group in Irvine that had given him the 14% bridge loan, had accelerated the note after learning of his defaults on the Long Beach project through a credit monitoring report. He was now facing a foreclosure auction scheduled for the 2nd week of February, and his only liquid escape route was the cabin. But his real estate attorney in Washington had informed him that the title company handling the potential sale had flagged a substantial cloud on title, an irrevocable trust recorded in Ferry County in March 2022 that listed Integrity Trust Company as the trustee and a certain Sarah Kessler as the trust protector with lifetime veto power. Michael came to the casita on January 5th, his shirt untucked and his eyes rimmed with red, his voice controlled but cracking at the edges. "You need to come with me to a meeting at the title office in Bellevue," he said. "There's a document that needs your signature. It's just an estoppel certificate. It's a formality that says you have no claims against the property. If you don't sign, the sale collapses, you'll be homeless anyway, and I'll lose everything. Everything, Sarah. You owe me this. After everything I've done for you, letting you stay here, giving you a place to recover, you owe me this signature." I agreed with the same foggy compliance I'd worn for 8 months. "Okay, Michael, whatever you need." I texted Robin from the bathroom, who texted Agent Hennessy, who arranged to have 2 undercover agents in plainclothes present at the title office on the morning of the scheduled closing, January 10th. The location was a sleek glass-walled office in Bellevue with a view of Mount Rainier, a national title company called First American Title. The transaction was supposed to be a direct cash sale to a buyer in Patagonia vest who'd been recruited by Michael's agent, a 28-year-old tech entrepreneur who'd sold a startup and wanted a writer's retreat in the woods. He had no idea he was buying stolen property. On the morning of January 10th, Michael and I flew from John Wayne Airport to see TAC on an early Alaska Airlines flight. He was jittery, popping antacids from a roll he kept in his jacket pocket, his phone buzzing with calls he kept ignoring. He told me at least 4 times during the flight, "Just sign where they tell you to sign. Don't read anything, don't ask questions, just sign the estoppel. I'll handle the rest. You're nervous, I get it, but it's just paperwork." I said, "Okay, Michael," and I looked out the window at the mountains sliding by below and thought about the woman who had taught me how to rewire a 3-way switch by flashlight. At the title office, a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long walnut table, the escrow officer was a young woman named Kayla, who had no idea she was about to witness a federal arrest. She distributed a stack of closing documents, including the trustee's deed from Integrity Trust Company, which had been provisionally prepared by the title company's legal department, but which contained a critical requirement: a final page called Approvals and Waivers Consent of Trust Protector, which needed my notarized signature to release the trust's hold and convey clear title. Kayla slid the document toward me with a professional smile and said, "Mrs. Kessler, we'll just need you to sign this last page, and then the notary can stamp it and we'll be all set to fund." I pulled the document toward me, the pen in my hand feeling like a conductor's baton. I read the page slowly, deliberately, taking in the legal language that Michael was so certain I wouldn't understand. Then I set the pen down and looked up at my brother-in-law. "I'm not signing this," I said in a voice that was perfectly calm. Michael's face went through 3 distinct shades of red, from a flushed pink to a deep brick to something almost purple at the edges. "What are you talking about? You said you would. You promised me, Sarah. We had an agreement." I let a long silence stretch, the kind of silence that happens just before a circuit breaker trips and the lights go out. I said the line that I'd been holding in my throat for 8 months, polishing it like a copper contact until it shone. The woman you thought was broken learned to rewire entire houses in the dark. She learned to run new circuits through old walls, to trace faults back to their source, and fix them with her own hands. You never deserved what she built with those hands. You never once picked up a phone to ask your mother how she was sleeping, never once offered to help lift your father from his wheelchair, never once saw the cabin as anything except a dollar sign on a spreadsheet. And I will never, ever sign anything that helps you sell it. Michael lunged forward, his chair scraping back with a sound like a scream, but the man in the gray suit who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the room moved faster. He stepped between us with a fluid, practiced motion, opened a bifold wallet to reveal a gold badge, and said, "Michael Kessler, I'm Special Agent Daniel Reeves with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Please place your hands behind your back." A second agent, a woman I hadn't even noticed enter the room, came through the door and moved to Michael's side, her hand on her service weapon. Two more agents appeared in the hallway. The escrow officer gasped and backed against the wall, her hands fluttering. The young buyer in the Patagonia vest stood up so fast his chair fell over, and his agent was already on the phone muttering about rescheduling and breach of contract. In the hallway, as the agents led him away, Michael was handcuffed with his hands behind his back, his Cusinelli blazer rumpled and one sleeve smeared with dust from the wall. He was read his Miranda rights in a flat, practiced monotone, his face a mask of total, absolute disbelief. He looked back at me once, and the expression on his face was not anger or hatred or even fear. It was the bewildered shock of a man who had spent his entire life winning and had just, for the first time, lost to someone he considered beneath his notice. The aftermath was not swift, but it was thorough and it was final. Integrity Trust Company, as the successor trustee, immediately retook legal control of the cabin. They worked with the lender who had been defrauded in the cash-out refinance to void the deed of trust, a process that required a quiet title action in Ferry County, and a forensic affidavit from the FBI's Question Documents Lab confirming that Evelyn's signature on the loan documents was a forgery. The $175,000 loan was declared void ab initio by a declaratory judgment entered in March 2024, and the lender chose to pursue recovery of its losses directly from Michael rather than risk a bad faith suit from the trust. My forged signature as co-borrower was removed from the adjustable rate note, and the credit reporting agencies were notified of the identity theft, a process that took 4 months, but ultimately cleared my credit report of any trace of the fraudulent debt. Michael's house in Coto de Caza went into pre-foreclosure within 60 days of his arrest, because the cross-collateralization clauses in his various loans meant that his personal residence was swept into the default. I had already moved out of the casita by mid-January, relocating to a long-term rental in Bellingham near Coastal Trust, so I could work with the bank and the attorneys in person. I learned through the grapevine that Brittany had filed for divorce in March 2024, citing irreconcilable differences and massive undisclosed financial malfeasance, and had moved into her mother's condo in Scottsdale with 2 suitcases and a leased Lexus. Her Nordstrom card really was frozen, a detail I learned from a mutual acquaintance who still had her on social media, and I won't pretend I didn't feel a small, private pulse of cosmic symmetry at that. Michael's Development LLC, Kessler Development Partners, filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy trustee recovered $220,000 of the stolen First Republic funds from a personal account he'd hidden in the Cayman Islands, money he'd used as a down payment on a failed spec mansion in Calabasas. The criminal case was originally a 12-count indictment covering wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, elder abuse, forgery, and perjury. After months of discovery, during which Michael's defense attorney saw the mountain of forensic evidence and the 24 witnesses the U.S. attorney was prepared to call, a plea deal was negotiated. Michael pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud in violation of Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 1343, and 1 count of aggravated identity theft under Section 1028A, the latter carrying a mandatory minimum consecutive sentence of 2 years that could not be reduced by a judge. On September 5, 2024, in the federal courthouse in Seattle, He was sentenced to 57 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay $587,000 in total restitution. That number included $286,000 to the estate for the stolen bank funds, $175,000 to the defrauded lender, and $126,000 in additional amounts covering legal fees, forensic accounting costs, and a penalty under the Washington Elder Abuse Statute. Separately, in the civil action I pursued through Robin Adelson, I obtained a judgment under Article 7. 3 of the trust for the full $93,137. $42 I had spent on the cabin, plus statutory interest and attorney's fees, bringing the total civil judgment against Michael to just over $127,000. That judgment attached to his personal assets, what few remained, and it forced the liquidation of a vintage Porsche 911, a ski chalet in Big Bear, and a portfolio of worthless penny stocks that somehow still netted about $12,000 at auction. The restitution payments were structured so that I would receive a monthly check from the court's registry for the next several years. But honestly, the money was not the point. The point was that the legal record now reflected, permanently and publicly, exactly what he had done and exactly what I had done. I moved back into the Loon Lake cabin on April 15, 2024, a day when the trilliums were blooming along the gravel driveway, and the lake was flat and silver under a thin layer of mist. The trust continues to hold legal title, and Integrity Trust Company remains the trustee, but as trust protector I have sole residential rights, the authority to approve any and all maintenance or improvements, and the power to name a successor protector in my own will. I hired the Finnish carpenter from Colville, the one who'd done the cedar corner boards, to build a screened porch off the east side of the house, the side that faces the sunrise over the water, and I paid him from my own funds because the trust's reimbursement had already been satisfied. I planted a Japanese maple out front, a blood-good variety with deep burgundy leaves, and at its base I placed a small bronze plaque that reads, "For Evelyn Kessler, who built the fortress I needed before I knew I needed it, and who taught me that love is not a feeling but a structure." What I reflect on most now, sitting on that porch in the early mornings with a cup of coffee and the sound of the loons calling across the lake, is not the betrayal itself. It is the astonishing foresight of a dying woman who had spent her entire adult life being underestimated by a son who saw her only as an obstacle to a payday. She knew her son better than he knew himself. She knew his greed would accelerate as she weakened, knew he would circle closer with every stroke she had and every pill she swallowed. She understood that the law is often a blunt, slow, expensive instrument, but that a well-drafted trust, executed with precision and held in secrecy, is a surgeon's scalpel. She hid the box beneath the floorboard of a closet in a room he never entered. She gave me the key 16 months before she died, without my ever understanding what I was holding. And she trusted, with a clarity that still takes my breath away, that I would be exactly who I had always been. A woman who fixed broken things with her own hands, who ran new wiring through old walls, who would not stop troubleshooting until the truth came fully into the light. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. No document is ever just a document, and no signature is ever just ink. A paper trail you keep when you think no one will ever need it. The binder of receipts you stash in a closet because an old woman told you to save it. The journeyman skills you learned in a crawlspace 2 decades ago. These are the tools that will save you when someone tries to erase everything you built. And the quiet acts of care you perform for years, unseen and unthanked, are not invisible to everyone. Sometimes they are seen by exactly the right person, a person who will, from beyond the grave, hand you the key to your own defense. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your stories. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe that every selfless act of care plants a seed that eventually grows into a force even the greediest cannot uproot, please hit like and subscribe to this channel. The truth always surfaces, even if it takes 7 years and a composition notebook hidden beneath a floorboard. I'll see you in the next one.